Hey, how's it going everybody? Welcome back to Aussie Fish Keeping. So in today's video, we're going to be talking all about a perfect cleanup crew for your aquarium. And in particular, I'm going to be recommending the cleanup crew I would use if I was starting up a new aquarium, and how I would layer my cleanup crew to have literally the most efficient cleanup crew you can possibly have. But yeah, I guess without any further ado, let's just jump straight into today's video. So in my opinion, to have the ultimate cleanup crew, you do need 4 things. So number 1, you need a species of snail. Number 2, you need some sort of bottom-dwelling aquarium fish. Number 3, you need some sort of algae-eating aquarium fish. And number 4 is sort of optional, and it really just does depend what other fish you have in your aquarium, and that's having some sort of shrimp. So I won't spoil it too much, but there definitely is a whole lot of benefits if you do have these 4 things in your cleanup crew. So first things first, let's talk a little bit about snails. So the first reason you're gonna wanna have snails in your aquarium is for algae control. So many freshwater snail species, if not all, actually do graze on surface algae in your aquarium. So that could be algae growing on your glass, on your decor, on your plant leaves, and they actually are super effective at doing that. So as for the types of algae these guys will clean up, it could be anything from green spot algae to brown algae. Practically any sort of film algae they will absolutely devour. So algae control is one of the benefits to having snails. Number 2 is detritus and waste removal. All snails are scavengers, and what that means is they'll go around, particularly at nighttime, and they'll pick up any food that your fish don't eat. They'll also eat any dead fish, so if your fish dies in your aquarium and you don't know about it, they will literally just devour it overnight, which can be super beneficial at minimizing the risk of any fluctuations in the nitrogen cycle. And another thing they'll do, some species of snails, particularly Malaysian trumpet snails, will actually bury themselves in your substrate, and they'll actually come out at nighttime. And by doing this, they're stirring up your substrate constantly, which means they're kicking out any detritus that settles in there. And by kicking it up into the water column, your filter can much more effectively suck that up, which does keep your water column a whole lot cleaner. And even just your snails like bladder snails and ramshorn snails, while they're going over your substrate, they are also kicking up any debris that's on the surface layer of your substrate, and that's going to make it a lot easier for your filter to suck up as well. So yeah, that's definitely another benefit of having snails. And as for the final benefit to snails is plant debris management. So what I mean by this is when your plant leaves begin to wilt or die off, your snails will actually eat them. So that actually does reduce the amount of organic debris that actually settles in your water column, and it just gets rid of all of those unsightly dead leaves flying around in your aquarium. And by eating all of this stuff, so by eating leftover food and plant debris, it actually does fill them up. So you don't need to actually actively feed these guys. They obviously have super small stomachs, so they don't really need to be eating much anyway. But if you have an endless amount of detritus, dying plants, and algae, these guys will literally just be able to thrive in your aquarium, and you don't need to really look after them whatsoever. So yeah, that is why I would highly recommend getting snails as a part of your cleanup crew. So as for your second fish on your list, you've obviously got your bottom dwelling fish. And in my opinion, the best sort of bottom dwelling fish for a cleanup crew is something like a Corydoras catfish or a coolie loach. So both of them basically do the same thing in the cleanup crew. And number 1 is detritus and waste removal. So both Corydoras catfish and coolie loaches will forage throughout the substrate, and they'll actually pick up any of that leftover food that your other fish don't eat. And by taking out this leftover food, it means it doesn't decompose and contribute to the nitrogen cycle. And also it just keeps your aquarium a whole lot cleaner. And while they're foraging through the substrate, they'll actually be kicking up the detritus from the substrate and on the surface of your substrate, which makes it once again easier for your filter to suck up. And coolie loaches may actually bury themselves in the substrate a little bit, so they're very similar to the Malaysian trumpet snails in that they're constantly going to be turning that substrate over. So yeah, that is benefit number 1 of having a bottom dwelling fish. Number 2, I don't really know if this makes them a great cleaner fish, but they actually do aerate your substrate as well. And this is particularly great if you have a super dense compact substrate like sand, just because when you have sand in your aquarium, all sorts of toxic gases can actually build up in bubbles under your substrate. And when your fish go over and turn that substrate over, those gases are released, which means they don't build up into bigger pockets of more deadly gas. So that is benefit number 2 of having them. In my opinion, I'd probably go with a Corydoras catfish over the coolie loach, and that's just because you do see Corydoras catfish a lot more. They're definitely a lot more active than the coolie loaches. They're a lot more fast moving and interesting, and they can be kept in schools, which is pretty cool as well. The coolie loaches are great as well. They're super peaceful. They hide most of the time, so if you don't really want to be seeing them, they're a great fish for that, I guess. But they are definitely a super unique and super quirky looking fish, so they're great if you want like a really oddball aquarium fish. But yeah, with that being said, detritus and waste removal as well as substrate aeration are the 2 benefits that come with keeping these guys as a part of your cleanup crew. So as for our next part of our cleanup crew, that's obviously going to be our algae eating fish. So as for the algae eating fish, I would recommend they're going to be the Otocinclus catfish and bristlenose catfish. So there's actually 2 benefits for these guys. Number 1, it's pretty obvious. I mean, they do eat all algae in your aquarium. So these 2 species in particular will eat surface algae, but you can get other algae eating fish like Siamese algae eaters that will eat blackbeard algae, or you could get things like rosy barbs that eat hair algae. But yeah, these 2 will just eat surface algae and film algae. So that could be things like green spot algae, green dust algae, brown algae, all sorts of things like that. And bristlenose are particularly great for a larger sized aquarium, whereas the Otocinclus are better for a small scale nano tank. So there's definitely an option for whatever style of aquarium you have. But yeah, as for benefit number 1, it's that they are super great at surface algae control. And benefit number 2 is that they consume a lot of biofilm. So biofilm generally accumulates on surfaces when it's like in a stagnant water body. So sometimes you can see biofilm, particularly if it's in a nice thick gel sort of layer, although other times your bristlenose or Otocinclus have already eaten it, so you can barely really see it. But yeah, it's basically just like a thin gel. It's literally invisible sometimes, and that just sort of forms over your surfaces in your aquarium. Particularly if you have things like botanicals or wood in there, you will get a lot of biofilm growing, and your bristlenose and Otocinclus will take care of that for you. So yeah, that's benefit number 2 of having these guys. Once again, in my opinion, I do prefer the bristlenose. That's just because I've kept them the most. I haven't really kept Otocinclus, but I can definitely see that in a nano aquarium, Otocinclus would be the way to go for sure. However, bristlenose are generally cheaper. They come in more varieties. They're a lot cooler in my opinion, and they can go with a lot more different tank mates. So yeah, as for the 3rd fish on your list, you're gonna want something like an Otocinclus or bristlenose. And moving on to the final component to our ultimate cleanup crew, we've got shrimp. Now, shrimp could be things like Amano shrimp, cherry shrimp, North Queensland algae eating shrimp, red nose shrimp. There's all sorts of little aquarium shrimp out there, and all of them are super great to add to your cleanup crew. So there's actually 3 things that these guys will do. Number 1 is algae control. So cherry shrimp will actually eat small amounts of hair algae in your aquarium, and I have heard that they do eat a little bit of like surface algae in your aquarium as well. So little surface algae growing on decor and on your glass they may eat. So they're a great addition just to eat algae. And number 2, they'll actually eat any sort of leftover food that your other aquarium fish eat. And when they're doing this, they're obviously going to be going around your aquarium. They're going to be stirring up the bottom of your aquarium a lot, and that is once again going to kick the detritus up into the water column, and your filter will be able to suck it up then. But yeah, they're definitely great just as little scavengers to go around and eat all sorts of leftover food as well. And as for the final benefit to these guys, they actually do eat biofilm exactly like the bristlenose do. So when biofilm forms on your botanicals or just on surfaces in your aquarium, these guys will actually graze off it, and it's actually super beneficial to have that in their diet. And in a super established aquarium, you won't actually really need to feed your cherry shrimp much at all, just because they can live off the resources in your aquarium, particularly if it is a balanced ecosystem. And in my opinion, I'd go with something like a cherry shrimp. You could obviously go with an algae eating shrimp, but cherry shrimp are great at algae eating. They're great at everything else I just mentioned, and additionally they're super colorful and cool as well. So I don't see why you wouldn't go for them. But yeah, with that being said, cherry shrimp are the final component to our cleanup crew. So obviously I've listed a few fish in this video, and I've tried to keep it so that you can make a cleanup crew for your nano aquarium and for your like larger sized aquarium. So for your nano aquarium, obviously you choose some sort of snail species. So that'd be ramshorn, Malaysian trumpet snails, neurite snails, things like that. The bottom dwelling fish you'd go for is obviously either the coolie loaches or pygmy Corydoras. You could then go for the Otocinclus as your algae algae-eating fish, and you could keep them with cherry shrimp as well. And if you have a larger sized aquarium, you'd go with, again, things like ramshorn snails, Malaysian trumpet snails, even mystery snails. And as for the bottom dwelling fish, you could go with some larger sized corridors. As for the algae eating fish, you could then go for something like a Siamese algae eater or a bristlenose. And you may not actually be able to keep the cherry shrimp with these guys just because the larger size corridors will actually pick them off, but you may be able to find some larger size shrimp like riffle shrimp or amano shrimp that could go with them. So yeah, with that being said, that is actually going to bring us to the end of today's video. So I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope I helped you guys make a little cleanup crew for your aquarium. If you did enjoy today's video, make sure to go down and subscribe, and while you're down there, smash the like button and comment your thoughts on today's video. I always love going down there and reading them all, and I try to reply back to as many comments as I can. Also, if you haven't done so already, please make sure to go check out my website, aussiefishkeeping.com. I've got all sorts of aquarium fish, botanicals, and other aquarium products up there. So yeah, I would highly appreciate if you went and checked that out. But with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in that next video.